Warm channel. Today I want to talk to you about one of Nicole Eisenman's prettiest works. She was born in France in 1965 and grew up in New York. Nicole's paintings are actually pretty personal. They kind of show bits of her own life. She's picked up a ton from art history. You can totally see traces of big names like Picasso, Philip Gaston, Pierre Bonnard, Edvard Munch, Francis Bacon, and lots of others in her work. In some of her paintings, you even catch a bit of David Hockney like in this portrait here. Her work is full of strong emotions. You can really see love, fear, hopelessness, tiredness, repetition, emptiness, all of it clear as day. There's always some kind of story going on in her paintings, even if it doesn't really have a clear start or end. Eisenman's stuff is funny and cartoon-like, kind of like caricatures, but at the same time super serious and dramatic. Let's get to the main point. In this piece, there's this big frame. And right inside it, there's a smaller white frame. Here, I just want to point out a little similarity between Eisenman's work and Picasso's. I can show you a great example of Picasso's work where the table is seen from above. Here we have a table, it's seen from above. Exactly the way Eisenman's described it. In this one, the fruit bowl is shown from the front, right at the painter's eye level. But the table is seen from above. It's actually a really beautiful piece. Maybe one day we can take a closer look and analyze it. This white frame it's actually just a table. But there's the thing. There's no one-point perspective at all, like this. The artist has totally messed with perspective if we ask ourselves whether this painting follows the usual rules of representation. The answer is a big fat no. So right from the start, we kind of see a bit of Picasso going on in Eisenman's work, just like how Picasso used to look at objects from all these different angles and then mash those angles together in one side frame. Eisenman is basically doing the same thing here. There's this bunch of people sitting around a table. What's funny is we're looking straight at the people, like head on, but the table they're sitting at, we're seeing that from above. Almost like the artist climbed up on the ceiling and looked straight down at it. The table's painted this kind of cold icy white. And if you look around for that same chilly white in the painting, you'll spot a little white moon up in the top left here. It's like that a small moon is answering back to the big white table. It kind of feels like two singers at a concert, both singing tenor. One does a high tenor, the table, and the other comes back with a low tenor, moon. If that little moon on the left side of the picture wasn't there, and instead those dark smudges around the table spread all the way into that area, like this. There's no way this painting would be as beautiful as it is. This white moon on the left gives the whole thing this kind of nostalgic vibe. Something that feels full of longing, a bit out of reach, far away. The white table feels totally lifeless and cold, like it brings this sense of freezing or stillness into the room. It's interesting how the colorful areas around the table seem like they're supposed to balance out that icy feeling, but for me, they just don't. It still feels cold. Around the table, it's full of colors, even though they're not super high saturated like these colors. They still add just the right amount of variety to the painting. The colors are all in darker tones, like these colors. In the foreground, there are four human figures paired up and socializing with each other. On the left side, there's a figure that's kind of like Death from Bergman's film The Seventh Seal. That figure's face is pale, almost white, and bigger than the others. It's like we're seeing the reflection of the white table in their face. And actually, I'd even say we could see some of the whiteness of the moonlight there too. Even that chunk of meat the Grim Reaper is putting into his mouth. Here. With that streak of red sauce running down his chin. Here. Totally suggests blood. And the yellow inside his eye socket just adds how creepy he looks. Sitting across from this Grim Reaper, well, that's what we're calling him here, is this person who seems absolutely terrified staring at this eerie portrait. It's like the bite she's about to take is literally the last bite of her life. The face of this figure is super bumpy and textured. Eisenman's brush strokes really amp up the fear and anxiety that's supposed to be on her face. Meanwhile, the black and white patches on the Reaper figure are painted slowly, carefully, with a steady brushwork. In contrast, the stripped outfit of the person across from him is done in this rushed, almost frantic way. You can literally feel the speed and urgency in the brush strokes. It makes it clear that this figure is falling apart, totally scattered, like they're on the verge of collapsing. Even their clothes seem scared on them. The way the stripes and textures are painted totally gives off this vibe of fear and desperate urge to run. Alright, now let's move on the figures on the right. These two figures. They're super interesting too, both visually and in terms of character. Out of these two figures, the one on the left with the bright red tip on her nose here and the bits of red in her eyebrow totally reminds you of a Matisse portrait. This portrait feels like warm, melted, squishy Play-Doh. It's so soft and gooey looking, almost like it could just slide right off. The figure across from that one is holding up her wine glass with this firm green hand. And it looks like the two of them are toasting each other. You'd think that should make the scene feel cheerful, right? But it's actually the complete opposite. It's a nice, pleasant subject on the surface, but the way the artist handled these two characters, with the way the colors are applied, the textures, the forms, and all the exaggerations, means we don't get any sense of lightness or joy. Like you'd expect from a party scene. Instead, it feels heavy, almost unsettling. It's like these two figures are actually toasting to nothingness, to entropy itself, almost as if they're celebrating this invisible force that's slowly corroding and breaking everything apart from the inside. It feels like there's some unseen thread flowing through the veins of the people in this painting, but we don't see it directly. Instead, we see its effects written all over their faces. That green hand, which is super Picasso-esque, and the feet and hands down in the lower right corner, they don't really have solid, carefully modeled volumes, especially in those two figures on the bottom right. There's barely any precise shaping going on. It all feels loose, almost falling apart, which just adds to that sense of underlying decay. It's like their hands and feet are mostly just lines, and even where there is some modeling, it's not based on any realistic or even semi-realistic representation. Like here, and here. What's interesting though is that the wine glasses are painted super precisely. They've got this clear, sharp lighting and really solid volume. The wine glasses look so firm and balanced, so perfectly symmetrical and sturdy that you kind of feel like they're actually more stable, maybe even more long lasting than the human figures themselves. Usually, you'd expect the portraits, the people to be stronger, more solid, more lasting, but here they're not. The sturdy symmetry of the objects on the table actually makes you think of how in real life our loved ones leave us forever. They die, but their fragile little things like their glasses, clothes, books, wine glasses end up outlasting them by far. Sometimes these delicate objects stick around for generations long after the person is gone. Now let's look a bit more closely at the form and the space. In this painting, we mostly see a relationship between vertical and horizontal and diagonal lines. The human figures are mostly vertical, like these figures. While the hands, like here, here, here. While the hands are mostly diagonal. The figures are mostly arranged vertically on the canvas, except for that figure on the left side who's resting their head on the table. This one is horizontal, especially the upper side of his or her body. But it's not just the figures that suggest vertical lines, as I told you. Look at the lines of the two chairs up front here and the chairs on the sides here and here. They're all vertical too. I'm trying to show you these vertical lines. Even in this part of the work, it's so dark, you cannot see it clearly. Then there's that super strong vertical line right in the middle of the table, here. Created by the big black bottle shaped like a candlestick. Because of the intense black and white contrast there, here it's totally black, and the table that is white, it really draws your eye and puts even more emphasis on the verticality in the painting. It draws your eye, your attention. Even in the background, the texture on the deep crimson red wallpaper suggests tons of vertical lines. Here we have a texture in the background in crimson red. It suggests vertical lines too. Yeah? But it's not like there's a shortage of horizontal lines either. The top edge of the table here, exactly like this line. The wine glass that's been tipped over here. Even the plates, these plates. They all give us some sense of horizontal lines. So you can really see how most of the relationships in this painting are between vertical and horizontal lines. And right in the middle of all these vertical and horizontals, there are quite a few diagonals too. Like the diagonal lines of the window ledge, or the angles of the hands, for example, in that figure in the background here, or the one down on the bottom right, the green hand here. That diagonal lines of the window actually runs parallel to the arm of that figure in the background, this figure. Finally, the central part of the painting, the white table, is the area with the highest contrast. It totally grabs your attention. Okay. On the edges of the painting, the contrast drops off a lot. The margins are almost completely dark. Margins are almost completely dark. And the figures themselves are so dark they pretty much get swallowed up by the edges. There's also this really funny kind of contrast happening here. Also, we have a composition that margins are totally dark, while the center of the painting is illuminated with light. And here outside in the dark night, you've got these tiny dotted lights on the buildings. Here, exactly like here. A delicate little pattern of black and white dots. You don't see that kind of fine dotted texture anywhere else in the painting. So it totally clashes with the rough, messy, slapdash splotches that make up the figures inside the room. Here, this texture is tiny, careful dot outside versus loose, big, loose, almost careless brush strokes inside. One of the really beautiful things that Eisenman does is create these kinds of contrasts, like the contrast between how precisely she's painted the grapes in the center of the picture here versus the super quick messy brush strokes she's used for the portraits of the figures against these brush strokes here in these portraits. That's honestly one of the nicest contrasts in the whole painting. And just like how the dark figures kind of disappear into the dark edges of the painting, these figures, they are disappeared into the dark edges of the painting. The white plates are so bright. These white plates are so bright. They basically get lost in the whiteness of the tablecloths. The dominant colors in this painting are mostly reds, browns, yellows, oranges, basically all kinds of warm mixed tones, like these tones. You can find them in margin. But right in the middle of all these warm colors, you get these lovely greens and blues like down here on the bottom right in the portrait and the hand of the person on the right here. Or those green patches on the figure on the left here. They create this really beautiful contrast between warm and cool colors. In the upper right background, there's a figure of a woman sitting at the edge of the frame smoking a cigarette, and she strongly evokes the women of Pierre Bonnard. Apparently, anyone in art history who ever did something beautiful has left a trace that you can find somewhere in Eisenman's work. The man sitting in front of this woman, she's also holding a dog in her arms, this man seems completely captivated by her, and you can't quite tell what thoughts are running through his head. The woman up there in the top right corner looks like she's straight out of the 19th century, dropped right into the middle of a 21st century party in New York City. And then there's the moonlight outside. It hits the wine glass by the window. The one that's being gripped so tightly by that man's clenched fist. Here. And it reflects off it beautifully. It's like we can even see the moonlight on the table, and even though the angel of death is only shown in profile, we can still kind of link the whiteness of his face to the moonlight. Even if logically there's no real reason why these things should be connected. Maybe he's coming to this group of people from another world, like a ghost, especially since the way he looks and what he's wearing seem way more like something out of 18th or 19th century. Overall, this painting is just incredibly beautiful, and honestly, if I wanted to keep describing and interpreting it for you, we could go on talking about it forever. Before I wrap up, I just want to point out the melting lamp on top of the figure's head here. It honestly reminds me more of poop than anything else, and if you look closely, you can even see a bunch of flies buzzing around it. That's just one more sign of how messed up things are for these people, and there's also a really interesting kind of humor in it, a dark, bitter humor that's totally woven into the painting. All in all, this piece is incredibly beautiful. I never get tired of looking at it. I love all these contrasts. How it feels a bit like Picasso, a bit like Bonnard, a bit like Edvard Munch. I love how she's brought all of that together. I think Nicole Eisenman is super smart for being able to collect all these influences in one painting, but still personalize it and make it totally her own. If you enjoyed this video, please like, leave a comment and subscribe.